All right, so today we're going to talk about the colored conventions. This is something that goes on between roughly around the 1830s. I think the first one is being in 1831, and it goes all the way into the right before the Civil War, if I'm not mistaken,
A
and
little bit after.
a little bit after. And this is pretty much an intellectual fight on what black Americans should do within the United States. And there's a huge battle, there's a huge debate that's going on where whether or not they should go back to Africa or whether they should actually stay within the United States. And if they're staying within the United States, how should they go about ensuring the protections of their freedom? And the one that we're going to be reading is going to be the first one, if I'm not mistaken, in 1831 by Richard Allen. And the whole entire thing is a dedication to becoming American, a dedication to the soul of Americanism, and realizing that America is not following its own prophecy, its own ideals. And their whole entire mission is how can we become domestics? How can we become full citizens within the United States and protect our rights?
I think that's right. One thing say on that is that it's a little bit like Richard Allen. He becomes the kind of presiding kind of president over this meeting, and one of the kind of notable features about this record and that we have from this is that they designed this convention or this conference, you could think of it, to kind of model a Republican government. So there's a president, a vice president, a treasurer, and like the first kind of half of this record of this meeting is kind of the logistical setting up of the way the meeting should work, how more people can be involved, the different organizations and ways that this can be funded. So it contains things like, just an account of how money should be handled, what people should be invited, that there should be a parent organization for organizing these, and there should be auxiliary organizations from each state that could, in principle, serve as representatives from each state, so that all the black voices could be accounted for. Because obviously, it's like the early 1800s. It's not possible for everybody to like sort of telephone their votes in or have cross country communication. Some of the black voices that are very important to this are in the South, but are, obviously some of them are enslaved, some of them are, a smaller amount of them are freed, but they're trying to be representative, uh, mostly as free black persons, while also trying to do something about their fellow enslaved black Americans. And yeah, so I
Yeah,
think that's
it
kind of
and
important to get
let's
in it.
and it's kind of easy to kind of take for granted the concept of organization. It's been a big thing since like the 1890s all the way into the 60s. People were making groups and organizing this and organizing that and having rules of power and things like that. And but what's super interesting about the Colored Convention is that they're organizing a system and having a constitution for the Colored Convention in the middle of the 1830s. And I think that's something that should be looked at as virtuous because their mentality is not, hey guys, let's take arms and revolt, but it's hey let's organize, let's being able to integrate people with brains and resources and money and being able to make economic movements. And that's pretty much the color convention, at least in 1831. It's how do we gather these money, resources, and people and be able to establish somewhere in northern Canada where we can be able to not only protect ourselves but also protect the people who want to be a part of the community.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you bring up this idea of like revolting and violence, and this constant theme in kind of the Black American history is, what does our resistance look like? Does it involve violence or nonviolence? So like part of part of the kind of background context to get here that you could see coming through the record is that not too long after this, in fact, we get the Nat Turner Rebellion. There were other, which is like a major slave insurrection, or slave revolt. And before this, there's other notable slave revolts. In people's mind at this time are things like the Haitian Revolution. in people's minds are other kind of earlier slave revolts. There's also like even in particularly running through the American consciousness at this time is even events such as the French Revolution, and it's like it's important to get that like all of these events weigh heavily on the time period of the 1830s. It's once you become accustomed to this history, it's not a weird question to ask kind of what the f was happening in the 1830s, because uh right around now is when the pro-slavery argument, as many historians have documented, is shifting from a sort of necessary evil to this is like a moral positive good. And part of the reason they're doing that is because there's also a growing abolitionist sentiment. um 10 years before this meeting, there was the 1820s uh Missouri Compromise. So there was another big kind of watershed in the fight for slavery, where there's been this big compromise between North and South on how to decide how many slave states and free states they're going to be. So there's a ramping up of conflict between these kind of two kind of forces in American society, and it's starting to come to a head.
And I think because of these conditions are anteing up, I think that's what makes the colored convention more noble, is because you do have these insurrections, you do have these revolts, and yet they're adamant about orchestrating means and having procedures and rules and a community to integrate resources. And I think the highlight of it all is just the title of the Constitution. So the title is the improving conditions within America. I think one of the premises within like a revolt or insurrection, if it's a local insurrection, you're just kind of rebelling against like that plantation. But if you're trying to have a nationwide insurrection or something like that, the premise of that is that Americanism or America is inherently against you. In a way, it is, considering that you had slavery. But there's also a very noble mentality within the Colored Convention. Is this is America, and we want to be domestics. We don't want to revamp it. We don't want to destroy it, but we want to take what's already good and make it better. And I think that's the mentality that's implicit in, or very actually very explicit in the Colored Convention. And I think during the conditions and the insurrections, I think that makes it so much far much more virtuous.
Yeah, so let's unpack some of that, which there is a lot to unpack. So first off, like, yes, I think it's important to like, and this will be a running theme through all of these. And just I think it's important to grasp about what makes the abolitionist movement and all the kind of related movements part of this like reform period during the 19th century of America is these are fundamentally movements that are primarily building movements. They're trying to build and innovate on uh, the principles of a free society. And you mentioned Americanism, and like where these 2 points come together is that like the way that when it gets to the portion of this that's opening as our kind of address to the peoples of America, they state that like immediately what comes up is the Declaration of Independence. And they're saying that the Declaration of Independence has set forth this example. It has set forth these principles, and and they're stating firmly, we believe in them. We believe the government of America and a free society ultimately should be based off of these principles. We believe they're the right principles. And like you're kind of saying, like it's not it's an argument, it's sort of intellectual argument of these are the right principles, these are good, just things that the founders have set up. They use a lot of words that you can tell they revere the founders. And it's notable, I'll also add to this, that it's notable that it's not a room of white people they're talking to. So it's not to say that like they're trying to impress somebody by showing how much they love the founding of America or the principles of America. One of the things that comes through this convention is it's focused on, and even say it, it's focused on intra-unity. They're trying to unify amongst themselves. And they say plainly that one of the biggest barriers to their moral, political, and social elevation is the fact that there hasn't been enough unity yet. And it should come as so like it may be a surprise to some people to realize that something like, hey, black people in 1800s America, we have to get unified is something that has to be said. But like, it's notable that yes, it's not only something that has to be said, it's something that has to be organized and thoughtfully, and it has to lay down its fundamental ideas that are going to govern it and guide it. So, and one of the major touchstone for that will become part of the legal argument against slavery, part of the moral argument for slavery, and the political argument is that those ideas expressed in the Declaration of Independence is a major touchstone and guidestone and sort of social technology that they're innovating on.
And
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 yeah, go ahead.
and to talk about that, one of the words that they use explicitly is inestimable. And I don't even know how to pronounce inestimable. And I can't even say it. Is it
It
inestimable?
has, yeah,
But what that means is that the value of the Declaration of Independence is so great that it can't even be fully grasped. And there's a sense where they're looking at the Declaration of Independence almost as if it's like a divine document, almost as if. And the way that they're talking about it, the principles that's within the Declaration of Independence, of course, this is something that never existed before, and they're carrying on the same kind of soul that James Fortin once had when he heard the Declaration of Independence when he was like 11 years old. Back
so
in the 1700s, people weren't literate, so you go out into crowds and you go listen to people read things aloud. There was a crowd. There was a guy who was reading out the Declaration of Independence when it was first written. James Fortin, at the time, was a black American.
9.
Well, it was even before 9. It was an 11. Okay, so
Yeah,
even better. So he's 9 years old. He's listening to a guy talk about the Declaration of Independence, and he becomes so inspired to join the U.S. Navy to fight against Britain when he was at the age of 14. And even when he was captured, one of the things that he said was, they try to convince him to join Britain, and he said, America, I would never prove to be a traitor to her interest. And that's all because he listened to the words of the Declaration of Independence. And this is the same type of soul that's existing within the 1830s. And
yeah,
and that's the foundation for everything. And they're pointing to racist, especially laws in Ohio at the time. They're pointing to
yeah,
different laws, a slavery that's going, like black codes that's going against black Americans and stuff like that. And they use this term, they use a distinction towards the end of it, where it's like civility, civil rights, civil liberties, and then uncivilized and barbarians. And they're pointing to those laws and saying, these laws that are discriminatory in nature, this is barbaric, uncivilized, and the Declaration of Independence is going to be the philosophical foundation to bring social cohesiveness where people can actually live together, where their civil liberties are protected, and where we can pursue our own individuated lives.
yeah. And I think you bring up like there's a lot that like is a lot of thought that goes into sort of the argument they're making. Like, so on the point you're making about this language of civilization and barbarians, like if someone didn't know, I didn't know, and you kind of have to look it up to kind of get it, that like there's a line in here where they're like, tell it not to the barbarians. And like that whole passage is about basically it's an allusion to a biblical passage, but the point being that, you know, America is currently at this time sending out Christian missionaries to the so-called uncivilized world, and they're basically saying, don't tell those barbarians about the actual laws and things happening in America, because they'll kind of laugh us out. They'll reject our supposed civilization because it's these laws that are going on are a mockery. And the laws, like you mentioned, one of the other kind of catalysts for this meeting and then the growing conflict between free blacks and even in northern states and just overall throughout the country is a lot of states at this time have decided to pass um, laws banning residency in in the state from blacks. So either they're outright banning it or they're putting conditions on it where black people basically have to get a white person to sign off on them, sign off on them being someone who's, safe enough or allowed enough to come into that state and actually live there. And one of the major kind of motivations for this is what's currently going on in Ohio at the time, and the Ohio black laws that were passed. Another notable kind of thing happening here that this is aimed at is what's called the American Colonization Society, of which some blacks, but many notable whites were a part of, some of them well meaning, but not fully understanding that this is a coalition sort of making a covenant with evil. So mixed into this colonization society, whose main goal is to colonize Black Americans, free Black Americans out of America to Africa, is this is a, a lot of people come to see through this, guys, and see that this is ultimately something that serves the interest of pro-slavery slave owners and all their supporters, who ultimately see that once they can get free blacks out of America, they can tighten their grip on slaves and then continue their quest to spread slavery throughout America, which kind of signifies how much, even though in small numbers, the free Black population, just their existence is starting to pose a threat to slavery, and abolitionists are seizing on this and beginning to organize because of what this means, because their very existence, being free, being which a lot of people who are part of this, like you mentioned James Fortin, many of these people are inspired by and sort of mentored by James Fortin, because many of, and take example from him. So among this, conglomerate of people are businessmen, doctors, physicists, like people who are actually allegedly part of this race of people who can't be civilized, who can't learn the higher sciences and philosophy that white people can. They're actually capable of this. And many of them are congregated here. So the free Black population of America becomes an open kind of threat to the whole ethos of slavery. And this is why many pro-slavery defenders begin to double down and say, essentially begin a moral crusade for slavery starting in the 1830s.
I think we should pick up right here back onto the ACS and then kind of end the video here a little bit.
Yeah.
But explicit in the document is they understand the motivation behind the ACS. Like they get the concept, and they're kind of they're signaling to them. We nod our heads to you guys. Like we understand what's going on. But the basic premise from their viewpoint of what's wrong with the ACS about going back to Africa and whatnot is that the premise is that in some capacity, Black people belong to Africa.
Yeah.
And in a sense, right, in the very broadest sense, it's like, in a sense, that's kind of true, like geographically, maybe historically. But there's something implicit in this document that realizes that it's not about geography, but it's about the ideas and what type of political principles would we like to live by. And that's their fundamental distinction between the ACS. It's like, no, like, I don't know what's going on in Africa, and I don't wish to know, even after listening to the words in the Declaration of Independence. And the words in the Declaration of Independence, these are the principles that I want to live by. These are the principles that I want to die for. These are the principles that I want to protect. These are the principles that I want to be able to extract and be able to integrate to this new society. And so they even make it explicit in saying, yes, we want to, our whole entire motivation for action, the stimulus that gives us action, is becoming fully recognized domestics within American soil. And I think that's the biggest thing that's going to distinguish the colored conventions and the ACS. It's kind of like, do we just say, goodbye America? It's over. There's nothing that's going to be good to come out of this. Versus, no, the Declaration of Independence, the concept of individual rights, each man has a right to live. Do we have a right to uphold this and protect this and live by this? And I think that is the most important thing out of all of this.
Yeah. I think that's right. And yeah, and I'd add that, like, part of, so just to kind of close out on some like unique forward looking things that become fundamental parts even today, like one could stretch this all the way out to today. So what happens in this kind of, and we'll see it throughout these conventions, is this sort of seeds of birthright citizenship, which is currently under attack. What ultimately becomes the 14th Amendment, which is part of that. Another, both parts of it are under attack. So this idea of birthright citizenship, also this idea that like is part of the whole 14th and Reconstruction Amendment movement, which is that the Constitution of America, although it makes certain compromises with slavery, the ultimate standard for that should be overriding is the Declaration of Independence. This what they mentioned, the protection of unalienable rights, the protection of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They linked this to the fact that like what they're trying to do is to pursue happiness, to pursue the physical labor, to pursue the what they call the mechanical arts,
It
science, literature. They see this
in
as,
their words, union, peace, order, and tranquility.
yeah, and they see all these things in science. They see the advance of industry and economy as major parts to their own moral elevation. And again, like it's important that like although they could go on a rant about how it's this person's fault and that person's fault for oppressing them, it's notable that they're what they see is like one of the major things that's going to get this thing off the ground and ultimately make it successful and long lasting is their own moral elevation as individuals, and how each and they're speaking to the larger black community in America wherever they are, that like and we'll see it throughout the convention, that you have to take gaining the knowledge and resources to do this thing into your own hands, and like that's how we'll get this done. And that like I think yeah, I think it's good that we closed it. Maybe we should um kind of leave on like their words. So in one of the last parts, uh, they say that before we close, they say we would just remark that it has been a subject of deep regret to this convention that we as a people have not availingly appreciated every opportunity placed within our power by the benevolent efforts of the Friends of Humanity. This is a term they use for just all the allies. They often talk about Friends of Freedom. This is everybody who's freedom loving people, black or white, in elevating our condition to the rank of freemen, that our mental and physical qualities have not been more actively engaged in pursuits more lasting, is attributable in a great measure to a want of unity among ourselves, whilst our only stimulus to action has been to become domestics, which at best is but a precarious and degraded situation. And I think that's a nice place to leave it.
Ooh, I have another comment.
Go ahead.
Friends of humanity. I did just really. They said any distinction of color is invidious.
Yeah.
The view of just being human, just being an individual. I think that's
Yeah.
the most special thing ever.
Yeah, and we'll see more of that develop as we get into other records where they talk about the importance of scientific education. There even becomes a debate between, you know, should we just be focused on being sort of laborers with our hands, or should we look towards more intellectual pursuits? And then, like, eventually we'll get to records where, you know, I think notably a bunch of times they mention knowledge is power, and you know they drop all sorts of historical references to sort of enlightenment principles and ideas. So